Alright, so I managed to get my hands on this pretty old but new condition MBS Colt 90 dirt board, and what I want to do today is I want to do a breakdown on these MBS ATS trucks. So this is the older style of the MBS ATS trucks, and I believe the ATS stands for all-terrain skate. And this is their budget offering for their mountain board trucks. The other truck that they offer, I believe, is called the MBS Matrix truck, and that is a channel truck. This truck, as you can see, is a kind of a familiar form factor. This is the TKP style truck, and TKP is traditional kingpin. It means you've got the pivot cup, the axle, and then the kingpin in that order. If you flip the kingpin and the axle around, you get a reverse kingpin truck. So there's a number of things that makes this a mountain board truck instead of a normal skate or longboard truck. The most prominent and probably the most important of which is the hanger width. So the hanger actually has a couple of additional spacers that go on it, and including those spacers, the hanger width is actually 11.5 inches. Now a typical longboard truck, in comparison, is going to be an 8-inch hanger, and it just goes down from there. I think a lot of skate trucks are more in the range of 6 inches. So that's quite a lot bigger. So the other thing that makes these trucks different is the axle size. So these older ATS trucks use a 10mm axle. The newer ones use a 12mm axle, and normal skateboards and longboards almost all use an 8mm axle. So along with bigger size, you also have additional strength with a bigger, stronger axle. The next change you'll see is you'll see these little holes that are drilled on the hanger onto these little nubs, and you'll see they are not on this hanger. These are attachment points for an optional brake, which I don't have. So on these ATS style trucks, the way the brake works is sort of to have a normal-ish brake pad that mounts onto this point here, and it uses the hub of the wheel as the brake rotor, and it's just a simple cable brake system. The more advanced truck systems can have more elaborate brakes, including disc brakes. But the ATS is a more simple approach. Now the last difference that makes these a mountain board truck is going to be the low pivot angle. So the pivot angle is the angle between the base plate and the line that's drawn between the center of the bushing seat and the center of the pivot cup, which I've marked with those little crosses there. So I've measured the angle of this truck to be 25 degrees, which is much lower than a standard truck. I like to think of the standard pivot angle as being 45 degrees, but you'll also see a lot of 50 and 40 degree pivot angle trucks. But as far as mountain boarding is concerned, the reason the pivot angle is so low on the truck is because the decks are actually wedged. So here I've measured a 25 degree angle on the truck, and I've measured a 15 degree angle on the deck, and between the two of them you end up with a 40 degree pivot axis. One of the main advantages of that in mountain boarding is it drops the axle height, in this case, by I think just over an inch. And that's useful because of the fact that you have these large wheels that bring the deck higher off the ground. So if you're familiar with double drop or drop through decks in longboarding, you'll know that having a drop deck that gives you an inch of drop is pretty significant, and you're going to end up with a more complicated deck design. But the way mountain board does it is to have just a simple wedge on the nose and tail and a lower degree truck. So in a sense, that ends up being a bit elegant. All right, so now comes the point where I want to take the truck apart and have a closer look at it. So here we go. So, first thing, and I noticed this when I was riding it, this kingpin is very, very loose. So that's not something you like to see at all. If I look into this hole here, the kingpin slot, there's some cavitation that's pretty bad in there. That's not something we like to see. The pivot cup, it's fallen to bits, and I knew it was cracked. Even though I got these in new condition, these are old trucks. So I think the material that this is made of shrunk and cracked. Even considering that, that's not something you like to see. Another thing is this pivot. This is a really, really rough pivot. It looks like this was a sprue or some part of the casting process for the aluminum casting, and they just cut it off with a bandsaw and just left it completely unfinished. The surface of the bushing seat is really rough, and it even has some divots from, I don't know, probably another part of the casting process. And yeah, you don't like to see either of those things. I'd really rather see a nice polished, or at least smooth, bushing seats, so that the bushings aren't, grinding on anything. And I'd also like to see a nice smooth and round pivot at the end of the hanger. The rest of the cast seems perfectly adequate, but it's just the pivot, the bushing seats, the kingpin, and the pivot cup. That's all quite disappointing to see. That's not something you want to see in any truck you ride. So let's take a look at that real quick. So for this demonstration, we're doing just a straight top-down perspective, looking down at the hanger and at the truck. And so what happens is when I push down on this side, you can see the angle, the pivot angle of the truck makes it from your perspective, top down, that the axle has moved forward a little bit here and moved back a little bit over here, and that's the turning action that the truck is giving you. So as I bottom out the truck here, I'm able to lean about 6 degrees or so, and you can see that the hanger has twisted, maybe from your perspective, about maybe 3 degrees or maybe less than that. And that's because it's a low angle truck, it's 25-degree pivot angle. But that's when I allow the truck to follow its natural course of turning. The issue we have is if we have slop in the pivot cup or in the bushings or in the kingpin, I'm able to, with just the force of what's going on with the skating, I'm able to twist the hanger without doing any leaning at all. And essentially, this is the amount of control I've given up by having that slop, which in terms of lean represents about plus or minus, 5 or 6 degrees of lean. So what that means is, if you're trying to hold the board going straight, and there's enough forces going on from these big wheels and this super wide hanger and all the crazy things that happen on when you're not on a road, just mountain boarding on rough terrain, there's freedom for the board to be not going straight even when you really, really want it to. So it gives you basically a really weak center and a really poor core to your steering. You can increase the force required for the environment to affect your steering by, tightening down your kingpin even more or getting harder bushings. But at that point, it's still happening, and now the board's just getting, stiff. You're going to lose steering now, and you really haven't gained that much stability. So it's just a really, really big problem in terms of just having good control, especially at center. There is one more flaw to this, though. For every degree that this hanger's free to move on its own, that's a degree of turning that you're not able to get. So if I've got a 40-degree truck here, and I'm losing, 3 or 4 degrees of turning, it has the instability of a 40-degree truck, but only the turning radius of a 35-degree truck, right? So you're making a really unnecessary trade-off with your steering angle and your stability by having some of this slop. All right, so I guess it's time for some final thoughts here. So first of all, I guess the way that mountain boards have some of the turning angle built into the deck itself is a pretty interesting way of doing things, but I feel like the way it's been executed is a little strange. It's like they've gone halvesies with it. They do half the steering from the deck and then half the steering from the trucks, but they only do that with the ATS style trucks. For the Matrix style trucks, they do all the steering angle on the deck and 0 degrees out of the trucks themselves. So it's kind of a bizarre middle ground where nothing else is, even other mountain board trucks. So I definitely feel like that is a bit of a misstep in a way, because now you have 2 non-compatible systems within the same ecosystem, which, even under the same company, which is a little bizarre. But it's not the end of the world. What I think is a much more serious issue is, even though the design and the geometry on these trucks seems really solid for what they're supposed to be doing, the execution and quality control on these things is horrible. If you got a mountain board, in 2011, back when I think these were being made, and this was your first experience mountain boarding, and your first experience was on these things, you would have a really bad false impression of what mountain boarding is, because you were set up on trucks that can't really do their job adequately. And that may seem a little harsh, but really that's how I feel. And I should also say that this was sold as a really budget system, the ATS and this Colt. I think combined is about a $200 complete. And considering, material is cost, is just how it is. Manufacturing, the tooling, and the making the molds and all that, it's more expensive, and yet they made a complete that's more accessible than a lot of longboard completes, even today. So it's hard to be too critical with the budget and price point they seem to have set for themselves, but at the same time, they probably compromised too much with this particular product. I don't really have any good idea as to what their new ATS trucks are like, but just from looking at pictures, it does at least appear the fit and finish and presentation of them has improved a lot since the advent of these early ATS trucks. So that at least is a good sign. And they have also moved to the new ATS trucks to a 12 millimeter axle, which is more of the standard for mountain boarding anyway. So at least in that sense, they are kind of combining these 2 ecosystems together a little bit, making them a little bit more intercompatible, and improving the quality of the ATS at the same time, because stronger axles. So yeah, so these ATS trucks, they come from a time when mountain boarding was a lot bigger than it is today, and I just can't help but feel that if there was better access to better products and a more cohesive ecosystem, that maybe mountain boarding could have developed a little bit more than it has. So that might seem all too pessimistic, but a counterpoint to that might be that, well, these ATS trucks are just designed for kids, and to that I would say, I would still say the same thing. A kid doesn't have a lot of weight, so you're going to have a truck that's able to perform while it's pretty loose in order for a kid to use it. Otherwise, they're just riding a brick. And, if you want kids riding a brick, that's fine, but in that case, you're not really introducing them to a sport. The looser you make the trucks, the more evident all these problems become. And in order to be an enjoyable sport, the trucks have to function well. So anyway, I'm gonna get to work and I'm gonna try to tune these things up and see if I can get them to really shine. In the meantime, Longboard Technology, over and out. All right, so I was going to throw this in the another video, but I think I can just squeeze it in here. This is what I've done with the trucks to kind of tune them up. So for the kingpin, what I've done is I've basically soldered the kingpin in place. I'm not really soldering because it's not bonding the aluminum to the steel. Really, all it's doing is it's just gap filling so that there's not space for the kingpin to move. It's mechanically fixed in place. Technically, that's probably not good for the temper of the kingpin. For the pivot cup, I can 3D print a new pivot cup, and that's fine. You can also get pivot cups from a variety of sources. For the hanger, I've used a file to make sure this is rounded a bit more, and to take off any big burrs, and to round the nose of it. And then I've just taken some sandpaper to make it really smooth. And for the bushing seat on both the hanger and the base plate I just use a Dremel and smoothed it out really fast. It doesn't have to be like a fine polish. I'm just trying to make sure there's no burrs or rough surface. And the indents that were here, I've just kind of smoothed them over, and that should be enough to do what you want, because like it doesn't need to be polished so much as this you want to be as polished as much as you can. But for this, these aren't really supposed to be moving anyway, so having a little bit of bite isn't bad as long as it's not chewing them up. So aside from that, I'm going to be swapping out these bushings. These bushings, in my opinion, are way too hard, and also the urethane that we had back when these are new is complete garbage compared to the urethane we have today. We have so much better bushings. And so I'm going to make use of that, and the bushings are what is going to transform these trucks. So there we go. Longboard Technology, over and out.